I recently got one of my friends to play a Dungeons & Dragons campaign for the first time. She'd played a one-shot before in D&D and is a player in the Monster of the Week game I run, so she understands the very basics of how the game works. You try to do something, you roll to see if it works, you react. As a matter of fact, I would say reacting is the most important part of playing a tabletop role-playing game, but also the hardest, and this is foreshadowing. But anyways, we sat down, made her character sheet, and went over all the basic rules and mechanics. We also talked about who her character was, a half-orc fighter whose mother had a prophetic vision that her child was to be a great hero. She was part of her town's militia, her father was the chief, and she was very new to the outside world, but excited to learn about it. We filled out her personality, ideals, bonds, and flaws, and then called it there. When we came to the table for the first session of the campaign, everyone else was a pretty experienced D&D player. They slipped into their characters easily, which I think was daunting to that new player who was struggling to find her footing. She did great considering the little experience she had and how overwhelming D&D can be to a new player. But that said, when I talked to her after the session, she asked me for advice on how to get into character. I gave her some brief examples of how I do it, but I also realized that getting into character is one of the least transferable skills from other games into TTRPGs. So, I asked several fellow D&D players how they get into character, especially for the first few sessions in a new campaign. After talking to them, I believe I've created a list of strategies to help especially new players, but really everyone, get into character for D&D. Degrees of separation. One of the joys of tabletop role-playing games is being able to, well, roleplay. To take on a role that is different than your own in real life. That said, it is way easier to play a character that is somewhat similar to you, rather than someone completely different. Even though they might come from a very different situation from you, they can be, at their core, quite similar to their player. To be clear, this is not a bad thing. You do not have to play someone super different from yourself in D&D. In fact, it's way easier not to. That said, some of the fun of the game comes from the differences between you and your character. This brings us to the idea of degrees of separation. Basically, it's that for each player, there's a sweet spot between how different and how similar your characters are to you. Generally, I'd say that 3 major differences is a good spot to be in, but you can definitely start lower, especially if you're a new player. Some examples of these differences could be alignment, gender, motivations, general personality, stuff like that. It's also a good idea to label these differences either on your head or preferably written down to help you keep them in mind when you're playing. If you're playing a character that is a lot more optimistic than you are, let's say, write that down on your character sheet, probably in the personality section, so that you can reference it as you play. Speaking of your personality section, personality, bonds, ideals, and flaws. If you want to know your character well enough to play them consistently and enjoyably, you gotta do your homework. The backgrounds in the player's handbook comes with filled out lists of personality traits, broad and specific motivations, and flaws your character might have. I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that you've already filled this out already, but let's talk about how to apply it. First of all, read over this section and think about how someone in their situation might act. For the purpose of this exercise and whole video really, I'm going to assume that you already have the broad strokes of a character planned out. Their class, race, background. Take a minute to consider how your character might feel immediately before the first session begins. When you come to a point where you're not sure what your character would do, return to that feeling. What would you do if you were a person with that personality, those bonds, ideals, and flaws? As basic as it is, this is on the front page of your character sheet for a reason. It's super helpful. Gimmicks. If your personality, bonds, ideals, and flaws determine how your character acts, having a gimmick is a good way to determine what your character talks about in conversations with the NPCs and party. Think of this as your character's North Star and how they interact with the world. To be clear, when I say gimmick, I don't necessarily mean something silly. Your gimmick can be serious, but it should be something that your character can always return to when you are at a loss for what they might say or do. For example, the gimmick of the character my friend made was her naivete towards the outside world. She had never left her town and doesn't have a deep understanding of social cues or how to be polite. If there's something in your character's backstory that really changed their outlook on life or motivation, it could be that. One of the characters I'm playing right now's gimmick is that she's trying to revive her dead wife whose soul is wrapped up in an afterlife custody battle. Whenever I don't know what to say in a conversation as my character, I try to say something related, at least loosely, to that experience and motivation. This doesn't always work, but it's a good guideline to have for when people are waiting on you to say something. Motivation. We've touched on this in every section so far, so let's talk about motivation. Your character should have strong personal and moral motivations. These are directly correlated to your bonds and ideals. It can be overwhelming to try and think about playing a complete and developed character while also balancing playing a difficult game with a lot of mechanics. My trick for this is to really narrow in on specific motivations. It's a lot easier to think of terms of why someone is doing something specific than try and think of why they are the person that they are as a whole. When you make choices in character, think about what drives those choices. What's your character trying to achieve by what they are doing? Voice. A lot of people really enjoy giving their characters distinct accents and speech patterns, and I am not one of those people, and I suspect that having that expectation can be daunting to new players. When I talk about doing a character voice, I mean something more along the lines of how do they act in everyday conversation? One of the best examples I can give of this is from theater. When you get a script for a play, you already know what you're supposed to say. The decision that you get to make to bring the character to life is figuring out how you'd say those predetermined lines as the version of the character that you have in your head. Even if there seems to be a clear course of action in the game, think about how your character would go about following through on that. It's not what they do, but more how they do it. Party time. One of the best things about D&D, in my opinion, is how it brings people together. Typically, when you're playing a game of D&D, there will be at least a few other people playing with you, the DM and some party members. Mechanically, people talk about party cohesion all the time. Instead, let's talk about playing a character in a party. Your character's party is almost made up of a cast of kooky characters with their own personalities and motivations. The great news about this is that when everyone is doing something to pitch into a scene, it takes the weight off of each individual player. It is way easier to bounce off of each other instead of trying to do everything yourself. Think about having a normal conversation with some friends where different people are contributing and keeping it going versus the frankly terrifying idea of improvising a conversation with yourself for an indeterminate period of time. When you sit down to play D&D, you are sitting down to play a collaborative game, bounce off of each other. If another player says something wacky that you react to, think about how your character would react to it as well. Conclusion. I know that was a lot of information, but the final point I want to make is that it's okay to play characters similar to yourself. D&D is often hyped as a game where you can do anything you want and be anyone you want, but it's really hard to manage that when you are still learning how to play other aspects of the game. Role-playing is a demanding activity, but so is learning spells and figuring out your reactions and all that nonsense. You have to learn to play the game before you can make some of those really big swings with your character. The best part of this is, in my opinion, is that you're probably watching this because you are playing a new character for the first time. The great news is that playing a character gets so much easier as you continue to play them. It's a muscle that you need to exercise. The more time you spend playing your brand new character Sprout, the more they will grow into the bloom of a character you know inside and out. It just takes some time and effort to get there. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's my very first YouTube video, so if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see what I have in store next. Also, if you have questions about this topic or other topics you'd like to hear me talk about, let me know in the comment section. Goodbye!